Welcome back to Bread and Butter, where we are serving up the basics for Hearthstone improvement. This is episode 51, Back to Basics. Today, Doc cannot be with us. You probably already know this when I'm the one doing the introduction, that Doc isn't here, but he had a family thing he had to deal with, so luckily we have our favorite returning guest, Dragonrider. Dragonrider, how are you this evening?
I am doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I am doing fantastic, and she's being modest. She's doing okay. She's dealing with some dog smelling issues right now, and I don't know if she's going to survive the podcast.
You know, I'm trying to be a good dog mom, and lately I feel really bad, and one of our dogs, several of our dogs have been getting older, and I've been reading some things about dogs' stomachs and all sorts of stuff. And, some of the tips are don't feed your dog only one meal a day. Don't let your dog scarf down their food because they're inhaling a lot of air and that's really bad for their stomachs and all sorts of stuff. So, of course, I'm oh my gosh, we do all of that. Oh, no. So I, have gone into panic mode lately and I'm I need to treat them better and feed them even better. So they have been getting, they're normal pebbles and stuff, right? But they're also getting a little bit of scrambled eggs in the morning, and they're getting some meat and veggies with their dinner and stuff. And yeah, now they're we're going to lay right next to you, Mom, but we're going to be really gassy. So I might have to talk through my hoodie a little bit.
Suggestion, if you're looking for a healthy treat, frozen carrots. Get carrots, throw them in the freezer. They work like bones, kind of, and my dogs love them.
Ooh, I actually did just buy some carrots at the store today. I'll have to try that.
Very nice, very nice. So what have you been doing inside the game of Hearthstone?
I have been jumping back and forth between, I'll say, not only standard, but also battlegrounds, and also been playing more a bit on the Europe and Asia servers again, because of the catch-up packs. They're not only for returning players. Catch-up packs are for anybody. And that includes, second and third servers. So because it's based on the collection on each server, I have logged into those other servers. I got a couple of those packs, for logging in. And the event that's been going on is also granting those catch-up packs. So kind of been jumping around and just completing dailies and working on, getting through the event on the different servers and also playing Battlegrounds.
And how's Battlegrounds going? Are you an Anomaly fan, or are you ready for them to go?
I really liked the idea and thought it was super fun at the beginning, but as it's gone on longer and longer, I'm definitely I'm just kind of ready for the next thing in Battlegrounds.
Well, funny you should say that. Today we got the announcement of an announcement of an announcement from the Play Hearthstone that just basically said, hey, changes to Battlegrounds are coming. And we expect that. It's usually about a month after the standard release. It's before the mini set. So it's coming. It's not duos, but it's going to be something interesting. And the way they're setting it up is probably something we haven't seen before. I believe we're not going to see a lot of tribes introduced, maybe one a year or one every other year or something like that. I think they've kind of maxed the tribes they want to do, but we'll see what they bring. So in Hearthstone, I have been mostly playing standard. I'm still playing Paladin, although the last few days I've stepped away from Paladin. I said I need to diversify, so I've been playing a lot more Reno Shaman, which we will talk about in a little bit, which has been a really fun deck, and just trying to figure out what I want. THL starts up this week, so I need to have my lineup figured out, and I've been working on that. I've been doing really well. I've played, as you guys know, I play a lot of Hearthstone. I've played a lot of games, and I've been around 500 at Legend. So I've managed to, I fell all the way down to about 10,000 at one point, but I'm probably, I think, around 7,000 right now, and we typically move in the right direction when I've been playing. Some of it is decay, some of it is, just you hit some bad streaks, but overall I'm pretty happy with the way I've been playing this month. But how about outside the game, Dragonrider? As we're speaking right now, Dragonrider is doing whatever she can to save herself from the onslaught that her pups have. I don't know, just filled the room with gaseous intent. What have you been doing outside of Hearthstone?
Well, besides apparently giving my dogs meals that gas me out, I have been working on kind of okay. It's still technically outside of Hearthstone, but some of it does relate to Hearthstone. But I have been putting kind of a big focus towards the end of this year on looking ahead. And I'll definitely, I'm sure on definitely at least the Doctor 3 podcast, if not more, potentially even this one, we'll talk about kind of like, New Year's goals and setting goals and different things like that. But I've kind of been trying to get a jump start on a lot of that, focus on, how do I want to direct my content? What do I want my content, and kind of brand look like next year? So kind of been doing a lot of like planning, thinking, organizing or restructuring of like my schedule, how I approach things, that kind of stuff. So yeah, some of it does relate to Hearthstone and like what kind of Hearthstone videos I want to do, all of that. But yeah, that's been kind of my big focus, as well as some Amberflight Gaming stuff as well.
I was just about to ask, what's new
Yes.
with Amberflight Gaming?
Well, can't tell you yet, but big things coming. It's things, again, that have been in the works for about 2 months now. We're kind of finalizing and getting down to the last bit of getting things settled and figured out for kind of what we're going to be doing next year, but definitely going to be doing a lot more next year than we have been. So very, very excited for next year, both for myself and for Amberflight Gaming. So yeah, just been a huge focus on that, and I'm very excited.
And how was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. It was good. It was very relaxing. Just my husband, myself, and my father-in-law. So, made some food, and then we played a bunch of board games, and it was good.
Fantastic. I had a fine Thanksgiving. We had family over. We actually did it on Saturday, which I think we might do more often, because instead of piling all the pressure of cleaning and cooking and all that into a half day after work, or pretty much after work, and then that morning, you do it on Thursday, you do it on Friday, then you have a nice relaxing day on Saturday, and you have Sunday to recover. I think that works. I'm glad they keep it on Thursday, because that way we have that 4-day weekend, although I'm a contractor, so I don't like getting the time off, because they don't pay you when you're a contractor on days off. So I actually managed to get myself to work, because I work with folks overseas. So I managed to finagle myself some extra hours by working with them, which I was happy about. And actually, those are the days that are most productive, because you're not being pulled into all kinds of meetings and everything. You can have focus on the things you're trying to do. Outside of that, I've been working on, I think I mentioned this last week, but myself and Pilot, we are going to be starting up a new podcast called The Rumble Report. And that is going to be based on the Warcraft Rumble mobile game. So we will talk about that soon. I'm hoping that we have something out in the next week or so. I'll let you know next week if that happens, or if it doesn't happen, it's why it doesn't happen. But I'm very excited about that. It's probably going to be a little shorter than the bread and butter, but poor Dawn got hit again. But it's the dog is found lethal.
Oh no.
But anyway, so today our first topic is there are some nerfs coming. We don't know what they are yet. We got the preview, the little circles with the green arrows and the red circles with the down arrows. We're not going to go through all of them. Not that there's much. There's a couple changes. There's a change to Azurite Snake. There's a change to Nathanos, of all cards. And there are nerfs coming to Sharpshooter, which, no surprise. There's nerfs coming to the Azurite Snake, which we knew because the change they made was only temporary. And then there's change to Order in the Court, which I am already rallying against. I think Order in the Court did nothing wrong and they should leave it alone. It's a good boy. But given the fact that the meta is probably going to change, Demon Hunter will probably be, and not that Demon Hunter I felt was overly oppressive because a lot of people don't know how to play that deck, and it was fairly easy to overcome when they make a mistake. It could be kind of frustrating when, they go off and you can't do anything and they eventually kill you on one turn because they just cycle through everything on turn 5. But for the most part, it didn't really feel that bad. Oh, they were also nerfing always a bigger Your Monster, Jägermeister, whatever they say, however you say it.
Yormonger.
Yormonger. I always just call it Jägermeister because it's easier. But they're nerfing that as well, so we'll see what that is. But given that these nerfs are coming, what's something good to play now that we have these nerfs? Because you've probably been playing maybe one of those decks. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I've been playing, because that way I can speak to it, and that's Reno Shaman. Reno Shaman has been a lot of fun. Initial thoughts on the what is it called? The Staff of the Nine Frogs. People weren't thinking it was going to be very powerful, but I have news. It is a very good card. You get out there, those frogs keep getting bigger and bigger, and it can lead to some inevitability. So the list, there are many different lists out there. I don't think you have to pick any particular one. You can look at all the different options. Some of them are a little bit more focused on things like Ignis. Some of them are focused on some nature spells. But I like the kind of mid-rangey one that I've been playing, and that has a lot of good cards. Let me just pull that up real fast. So the list I'm playing, why does it not want to pull up? Okay, here we go. The list I'm playing has cards like Cold Storage, Flow Rider. You usually have a Schooling and a Shock Harper. Astelar is always a good potential win condition to have. Obviously, we're running Doc Holiday and Reno. And we also have Prison of Yogg and Yogg, which are two very strong cards in there. Giant Tumbleweed, Horn of the Windlord, and Gulgamesh. So there's a lot of threats in there. Excuse me. So it's a very solid deck. Now, sometimes Reno decks can be a little intimidating if you don't know what you're doing because it's a pile of cards. What do I do with it? So first, let's talk about the mulligan. With the list I'm using, and I can post this on the Twitter, you want to try to keep cards like Schooling because they're good to kind of stabilize early. A Shock Harper will get you some value. Greedy Partner is a good card. We run Greedy Partner, but I usually only keep Greedy Partner. Sometimes it depends. I keep Greedy Partner, but I also will keep another 2-drop, even if it's not an ideal 2-drop to keep, because that way I can get the value out of the Greedy Partner, and we should be able to continue on from there. You want to keep Doc Holiday for sure. That is an absolute keep, and you can think about keeping Golganeth. That's kind of about where you want to go. When you start playing these cards, especially if you want to tempo out, you want to get Doc Holiday out there early if you can coin them out. The quicker you get your staff online and start swinging with it, the better. You want to be paying attention, though, because you can overload before you get to that turn, and then you can't do it. So be mindful of your plays so that way you don't lock yourself out of playing these cards as quickly as possible. You can play this deck a couple different ways. You can play it, and it depends on the matchup, right? It's always different depending on what you're playing. And I think if you've listened to Zacho talk about this before, you can be an aggro deck, and sometimes in some matchups, you're actually the control deck in that particular matchup. You're aggro, but you play it as more control as you are deciding to clear their board and waiting for your opportunity to strike. And then in some cases, even if you're maybe like a mid-range deck, you might want to be more aggressive and try to get under them before they get to their slow, control-y cards. So in this deck, and it's funny, my friend Pilot, who I'm doing the podcast with, who's a mod on my channel, told me initially that, hey, you really play this as a aggro, not really an aggro, but as a tempo deck, and you will see that quite often. And almost every game I've played after he said that has been about 25-minute long. But it's in the mirror, and the mirrors get weird. But you can't play as a tempo deck. So if you're looking at something like a Control Priest or even in the mirror or something, you can play Astalar out on 2, followed up with a jam session, and just play out your commanded Neptulons, even if they don't have anything on board to clear, and just put pressure on and try to make them react to what you're doing and dictate the pace. Some matchups you don't want to do that, but you have the opportunity to do that. You can win in 5 or 6 turns if you are aggressive enough and the matchup calls for it. One thing to remember is, as great as the staff of the 9 Frogs is, it will get Vipered, because I don't know any decks right now that aren't running Viper. It feels like Viper is just about everywhere, and it will get Vipered. Now, one thing you work around this is if you happen to have cold storage, you can play that on your own Doc Holiday. And that way, when they Viper it, you just drop it down. You have another Staff of the 9 Frogs. And if you start a new Staff of the 9 Frogs, remember that your frog count goes back to 1. It doesn't continue off from your last frog. So if you start a new one, you're back down to 1, but it's still good. We run an ETC in this deck, and what you put in the ETC will vary based on what you're seeing in the meta. Currently, I'm running a Fizzle, which is a great tool in the control matchups, especially the mirror matchup. It gives you some good value. You don't want to overfill it, because then it's hard to play later. But if you can get your Yogs, you can get your Prison of Yogs, you can get your Golganesh, you can get even Doc Holiday into that. That's good. You can get more value out of that. So you want to be looking at that. We also are running a second Viper, because once you've destroyed their frog, Staff of the 9 Frogs, they often have a follow-up. And same thing with Paladin. They also have the Horn of the Windlord. So having a second Viper pull out isn't the worst thing, or especially if they're playing an Ignis later. It's always good to have that. So you can throw in whatever you want. For a while, we were running a second Framestir. Framestir we're running, which is a card that nobody thought we would ever run, because it is not a great card, and it still isn't a great card, but it has a use now, and that use is to disrupt Reno. Now, you can use this card in a couple different ways. You can tempo it out on 3 and put a couple... It's actually not so bad when their turn 4, 5, and 6 possibly get disrupted by being overloaded. Or you can keep it in your back pocket and save it for turns when you know they're about to Reno, and then they can't Reno. And I can tell you, I have had people concede more than once out of shame for not remembering that they have no ability to play the Reno at that time, because they play it, nothing happens, and they concede. So it's a very strong card. For a while, I was running a second Framestir in the ETC, but that might be overkill. You can get a feel for the matchups that you're seeing. If you are not playing against a Reno deck, drop it right away. If not, you can also run things like Steam Cleaner if you want to for the Plague DK, but you don't see enough of them, I think, to justify that at this point. But if you do happen to see a rise in that after the change in the meta after these nerfs, it might be worth putting back in. You also, in general, with control decks like this, or decks that have control tools, a lot of times you try to save your control for the perfect moment. Don't. You have enough things to do where you can clear. You have Giant Tumbleweed, you have Horn of the Windlord that can clear big threats, you have Reno, obviously. Don't hold on to it for the sake of holding on to it unless you are sure that it's the right play. Like, tempo these things out, get them out there. Reno gives you that extra value. Giant Tumbleweed gives you a big swing turn where you're clearing their board most of the time and leaving yourself a 6/6. Make sure you just play your cards. As far as the end game goes, it doesn't really feel like there's a solid, always end game. Sometimes it's Astalar. Sometimes it's just having bigger and bigger frogs. Sometimes it comes down to just hoping off Prison of Yogg. Sometimes it's grinding them down until they run out of resources. You don't want to hoard everything. You can actually have hand size issues with this deck because you have a lot of tools that sometimes you're just waiting for things to play, but I don't recommend that. You can win, just play. It's a lot easier to have a victory when your opponent has no life. So that's what we're shooting for, and saving your cards for when something else might happen, and make them have the cards. Like, you might hold on to something because they're going to have their behemoth. They might not have the behemoth. So get it out there, play cards, and go from there. It's a fun deck. It's different every time. There's a lot of different crazy, wacky things that can happen. You can have multiple Titans out there with a randomly generated, what's it called? What's that called? Criminal lineup. You can get also multiple Ragnaroses, depending. You generate things that could happen. I've been told that the Ignis version isn't bad. It's a lot of fun, so I might try that. But just have a lot of fun with the deck, and I think it's going to see even more success once these other decks get nerfed. Especially Paladin is not a good matchup for us. So if Paladin becomes played a little less often, this deck is going to rise. What do you think, Dawn? What are your thoughts on this deck?
Yeah, one big thing that I really like about this deck, which is kind of reminiscent of the older Highlander Hunter, is, and one reason why I think that this Highlander, this Reno deck is doing so well versus, or compared to some of the other Reno decks, is that this Reno Shaman has just lots of good stuff, right? Like, a lot of the cards in the deck are just good on their own, right? They were already being played before Reno came into standard. Things like Ignis, as you mentioned in some of the lists, is very good. Obviously, things that are kind of newer, like the Tumbleweed, also just good on its own. The Staff to give you frogs, definitely good. There's just a lot of really good stuff. I think even, as you mentioned, you kind of said, like, tempo stuff out, play stuff. Pazic, very good card to just play on turn 4. The Backstage Bouncer, also another 4 cost that's very good to just, those things can come out at like any point, right? You can coin them out on turn 3. You can play them on turn 4 or 5 or 6, 7 maybe. And they're all very good. They work especially well in that kind of mid game if you are overloaded a little bit, so maybe you overload on one turn, then you can kind of play those as just really solid plays during that mid game while you're overloaded. Or if you haven't drawn things like your Highlander specific cards like Reno, or if you haven't drawn Doc Holliday, when you're waiting for those, just play those good things. And there's a lot of them in the deck. And that's one thing that I've really loved about it. So that even if you don't get those Highlander cards, it still feels like you have things to do. I know you mentioned a couple of these things, but things like Jam Session and Trusty Companion have been some of my favorites. Just going Jam Session, especially against Paladin, like Jam Session versus Paladins is pretty great. Versus hunters who have played out their, like worms or have the snakes on board. And Trusty Companion, even just to get a buff on something and draw another thing out of your deck. And you can kind of cater it a little bit. You can wait to play it and play it on something specific if you know that you're going to get a certain type, a certain minion type, if it has one. So that's pretty flexible. Like, even playing that on a Shock Hopper pretty early, right? Like a turn 1 Shock Hopper, turn 2 Trusty Companion is pretty sweet. So there's a lot that you can do kind of early game and mid game. And, I've even noticed that some of the time I'm able to get kind of mid game wins without even having drawn Reno or Dr. Holiday. Like one game I was able to pull off a win with Horn of the Windlord, and then playing the, oh gosh, you and I just talked about this. The Turn the Tides. That's what it was. Turn the Tides to add more attack. And then I could just hit my opponent for like 12 damage just with my weapon, plus whatever I had on the board. Being able to discover some stuff, discovering fire spells and turning something into a Ragnaros, that helps. Like I've done that. Hey, turn one of those. You have one of those little frogs out on the board, right? The hopper. Hey, turn that into a Ragnaros, or turn one of your, maybe you had 2 hero power or something because you were overloaded and didn't really have anything else to play, which doesn't feel like it happens often, but maybe you did that for some reason, and turn your totem into into a Ragnaros. But it does feel like I've been able to have a lot of games where even against the aggro decks, I can make a lot of like value trades, or you make a trade and then you transform whatever you just traded with the backstage bouncer, right? Or, then you turn, like you make a trade and then you turn that thing that now you traded, now it's only got 1 or 2 health, and then you turn that into Ragnaros. And there's a lot of things like that you can do that make all of the games feel pretty good. Which again, this is something that I don't think some of the other, like Highlander Druid's kind of wonky. I don't think it has as many of the kind of full game spectrum good plays as this deck does, we'll say. Like, yeah, there are some good plays and some good cards in Highlander Druid, but I think this Shaman has good plays that are early game, good plays that are mid game, and good plays that are late game, and any kind of combination of. So I have really enjoyed this deck myself. And as you mentioned, there are a couple different versions, some running Ignis, where you can run a little bit of foraging stuff and then have Ignis for like an additional win condition. The versions without Ignis, there's a lot of kind of just play stuff and buff things and transform things. And it does a lot without looking like it's doing that much at the same time, if that makes sense.
It does. And just a couple quick notes on the deck. Finally, if you are planning on using your cold storage on a Titan, your Titan or somebody else's Titan, just remember that freezing a Titan means that they can't use an ability next turn. If they're frozen, they can't use an ability. So that's something that can buy you a turn and also get you Titan. And one other thing, the nice thing about Highlander decks is they're a lot less a perfect 30 cards as some of the other lists, like the aggro paladins, kind of you can get to a perfect 30 or 29, and you don't really want to deviate from that. But in a list like this, if you want to try some cards out, you want to switch some things out, you have a lot more, I would say, leeway to do that in a deck like this. Like the other day, I was wondering why there was no Chisel in this deck, because we are playing Backstage Bouncer, and that just feels like a natural combination. And it's not in the list I have, but maybe I'll add it. Like, you have opportunity to just, I like playing with these cards, or this card's not doing something for me. Maybe I'll swap it out. And it feels like you have a lot more flexibility there.
Yeah. And some of the lists are running Chisel and some of that more early game, mid game stuff. Like you said, there's a lot of flexibility, things like Chisel or no Chisel, running Ignis things. Again, as you mentioned earlier as well, with things like Chisel, with things like the Horn, with things like, obviously, Dr. Holiday, there's multiple weapons that you can be playing as well. That also means if your opponent, especially if they are a Highlander deck as well, they're only going to have 1, maybe 2 Vipers. But oftentimes you can end up having more than that. So if they do Viper something, you're still going to get value from your other weapons. Again, like single good cards like Astalor. I've had even like Glacial Shards be just really good in a lot of matchups. Very good against like Odin Warrior, because you can freeze the warrior themselves, not just minions. So, you can freeze them. There's just so much flexibility with the deck that if this is something you want to try, I would definitely suggest try a handful of games with one list and then try a handful of games with a different list, or like you mentioned, Tito, maybe switch a couple things out. But it's so flexible.
Indeed. Well, that's it for the Shaman. I think it's now time to hit our main topic, which is one of our fundamental blocks that we bring Dawn on for to talk about. And Today we're going to kind of do something a little different. We've been here 50 episodes. We've had several of these basics kind of conversations, and today we're going to kind of review a little bit of everything. We're going to go back to basics and just kind of get us caught back up for the new year and the new expansion and go from there. So Dawn, why don't you take it away?
Yes. Well, just, as always, thank you for having me back for this. I love talking about this kind of stuff. So for anyone who maybe hasn't gotten to catch every episode, or if you're kind of wondering, okay, well, like, what are the basics? Let's just quickly kind of recap the different topics that we have talked about. So in one of the very early episodes, we talked about the phases of your turn, or kind of lack of phases, as Hearthstone kind of has. Just, it's your turn, and then you do all the things, and then your turn's over. Resources are a very basic concept to Hearthstone, and there's several different resources that you can use. So, for example, you have, your health is a resource, your cards are a resource, your mana is a resource. There's different archetypes to play. We were just talking a lot about tempo, how this like Reno Shaman is a very tempo kind of deck. You can play at tempo. That's one kind of style of deck or archetype. So kind of understanding what people kind of mean when they talk about different archetypes. If they say something like an aggro deck, mid-range, tempo, control, OTK, just kind of understanding what those archetypes are, or generally at least what they can do. Mulligans, we did kind of talk about mulligans and kind of understanding at least the basics of the mulligans and mulligan kind of thinking and the process of how decks want to mulligan. We talked about learning a deck in general, like just how do you approach actually learning decks and some different styles of learning decks and getting better at them. And we talked about tilt and emotions and kind of the range of different types of tilt that there are that can affect people when they are playing, and especially when they want to improve. I hope I didn't miss any there, because maybe there was another one that we possibly might have talked about or not. I feel like that's it, hopefully, but
I think you got them all.
Okay, cool. I feel like not only do we kind of just want to go back and like recap those a little bit, but I also just want to talk about the importance and the use of these, like, we say basics, but like kind of these fundamentals. And not only for Hearthstone, because these also transcend a lot of other card games, but for Hearthstone especially, knowing and really utilizing these fundamentals and these concepts you can use in so many different cases. And one example, I guess I'll preface this with saying there's a lot of kind of phrases, a lot of different ways that people say this thing in a variety of aspects, not even just card games, not just Hearthstone, but I'll put a few out there. Have you ever heard the phrase, you need to learn to walk before you can run? Like, that's a big one, right? Have you ever heard people talking about like learning to drive and how, that can kind of, there's a lot to learn with driving, or once you know the basics, you can kind of jump into any different type of vehicle. You can drive like a small vehicle, or you can get into a pickup truck, and they all kind of work the same as long as you know the fundamentals of how to work the pedals, how to, maybe switch gears if you need to, or park versus drive, reverse. It's all the same, but you can switch into different vehicles, right? In terms of like card games and gaming, especially with Hearthstone, have you ever heard a streamer, or maybe you've said, because I know I've said this myself, things like, oh, it's, insert name, Bunny Hopper, or it's Kibler, or it's whoever, right? Maybe people who are like really good at off meta decks. It's Funky Monkey, or it's, Boar Control before he joined the Hearthstone team, right? You say one of those like really top level players, right? Oh, they can play any deck. They could play something that's like doesn't even have a legendary in it, and they could still get legend with it. right? But I can't. And you know why that is? Now, maybe I can do a little bit better than the average person. Or maybe someone who's listening is like, I can't do that. I suck with these decks. Like, I have to play meta decks or I have to have these good cards. Maybe you've heard people talk about Arena. I'll tell you, sometimes I struggle with Arena. Now, Arena has its own thing of like, you kind of have to have a good sense of picking what cards are going to be good and that kind of thing. But when you're in the game actually playing, knowing these fundamentals, knowing what tempo means and understanding tempo, understanding concepts like value trading, or understanding I'm the aggressor in this matchup. Tito just brought that up in the previous chat, right? Understanding those types of concepts, understanding these kind of base fundamentals of, hey, if I don't play my cards, my opponent will just keep hitting me in the face and I will be dead. That's a basic thing that is one of those fundamentals. But when you're playing, especially when you're starting to learn, that can be tough to actually conceptualize and actually understand. But those people who you say, oh, so-and-so can just take any deck and they can hit legend with it, or they can be top legend with some wonky, like all neutral deck, or, you know, all commons, they can take any of those decks and be really good with it. And it's because that they are very, very good at utilizing these fundamentals, these basic concepts, and applying them to a bunch of different scenarios. It's the same with Arena. Those people are very good at learning Arena and then going and playing Standard and being able to do well in Standard because they have those basic concepts that they apply with whatever it is that they're playing.
And they also understand, though, like there is a difference between Arena and Standard in the way that you approach the game, because the amount of removal might be different, the synergies might be different. So you play a more, I would say, almost a more fundamental game in Arena than you possibly do in Constructed, because it makes more sense given the sheer amount of unknown you have in Arena versus Standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, maybe a little bit less now than when maybe the first like 3 or 4 years that Hearthstone was around. But if you listen to a lot of advice, especially from players who have been around for a long time, you know, a lot of those players might say, oh, if you want to get better, you know, you really want to get better at the game in general, go play Arena, right? And they're not saying that because it's exactly the same across the board, as you just mentioned. It's because, like you said, you're using those fundamentals and you're using those skills at a much higher capacity in things like Arena. So you learn those skills, you learn the trading and value, and you learn to just play your cards at a much faster rate than I think a lot of Standard. And again, maybe not as much now, but this was definitely the case, you know, a handful of years ago in the game. I don't know if you have felt that same way or not, Tito, but I definitely feel like I have.
I need to go back, and I don't think I've ever had more than 7 wins in an Arena matchup. So, but I also don't play it a lot. So I need to go in there and just kind of prove that to myself that I can do it. We're actually probably going to have a judge back on in the next few weeks. Talk about the new changes to the format. So, yeah, we'll see how that goes. We're going to have, I think, we're going to do a draft, and we're going to suggest which cards we would pick, and he's going to tell us why we're wrong. So looking forward to that. But yeah, it's been a while since I've really played too much Arena, so
sounds fun.
I need to get in there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, it's just kind of an interesting thing where I think, you know, again, one reason why, especially in the past, but even still now, you know, you might hear people who will suggest, if you want to get better at the game, go play Arena. And, you know, sometimes I think, well, you don't have to, though. You can just play meta decks and you can learn the meta decks and that kind of thing if you're wanting to play Standard. But that is just because again, the way that you're using these fundamentals, you're using these skills in Arena, and you can kind of use them in a lot of scenarios. Same way that the people who you say, oh, I can see Bunny Hopper, or I can see Pheno or Kibler or whoever, they can just take any deck and they can hit Legend, or they can hit higher Legend no matter what they're playing. Maybe people like Sidisi or Ron Mexico, who play a lot of Hunter and they kind of specialize in that. They can play random Hunter decks and they seem to still be like, high Legend or higher Legend. It's like, how do they do that? Well, again, it's because they have really kind of got a very good hold on these fundamentals and those kind of concepts. So, all of this, again, just to kind of say that I really just want to drive home that idea that these fundamentals and these skills, they seem basic. They seem like, oh, I can just learn them and then move on from them. But the better you get at them and recognizing these concepts in multiple scenarios, the better of a player you will be in any situation.
I completely agree with that. 100%. And a lot of times you overvalue things and you don't play your cards, and it's just remembering these lessons really just can help you. Sometimes you start mulliganing for feels. You'll look at your mulligan. You're like, I think I'll be able to play this card, but no, mulligan for your best cards. Like, you got to remember just what got you here. The expression, you go to the girl you went to the dance with. How did you get there? You got there by maintaining the fundamentals. So stick with them, and the more you hammer them home, the more they just become part of your thought process, and they don't become things you even have to think about. You just remember and operate on those building blocks.
Exactly. And that's also a big thing to know. I've done quite a few of these. I'm pretty sure that in one of those previous episodes, we kind of dug a little bit into the idea of like these circles, right? These kind of maybe tiers of level, these circles that you get into. At the beginning, you're kind of in this like beginner level circle, right? And then as you move up in like the ladder, you start to have this kind of progression of where you feel like, I'm not very good at this game. And then as you get better, you're like, okay, I'm getting better. And then you think, man, I'm better than these players that I'm facing now. And then maybe you hit a new wall, a new level, a new, rank floor, or a new just rank overall, right? Maybe it's like you get into diamond for the first time, let's say, and you're like, oh yeah, like I finally got into diamond. And then all of a sudden you're like, I'm losing a bunch. What happened? Or maybe the first time you hit legend, you're like, no, I'm facing players that seem to be way better than me. And we kind of hit these walls and we go, oh man, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. Oh, maybe maybe it was a fluke that I got there. Maybe I just got lucky. But these kind of scenarios are where we need to kind of, again, return to these basics. Like you said, think about what it is that got you to hitting legend in the first place. What were you doing to get there? Were you really like taking notes on your games? Were you looking at stats and looking at like, these are the best cards that I need to mulligan, as like one of the basic topics that we talked about? Or I really need to get into a better headspace about kind of these archetypes and recognizing, am I the aggressive deck in this matchup? Or do I need to reserve my cards a little bit? Maybe I need to play like one card and do a hero power every turn instead of just playing all my cards and then like having nothing in my hand. When do you need to do those things? Those are the things that we get better at over time, but they all boil down to these basic concepts. So again, like mulligans, looking at those archetypes, understanding your resources. Man, I got so much better at Rogue when I understood, especially early Rogue, like before we had a lot of these like miracle rogues and playing like 30 cards in a turn. But I was like, I did not understand for a while this hero power. Why do you get a weapon? why are people hitting into their opponent's minions with their weapon, with the hero power, with their face? That's so bad. You're losing health. But no, because they're using their health as a resource to remove those minions and actually end up taking less damage in the long run, right? There's even in like big tournaments, even at world championships, and I've noticed this with casting, sometimes in those matchups, maybe you've seen some of these pro players where it's like, oh man, they just took a weapon and they just traded their face into their opponent's Ragnaros or their opponent's 12-12. And you're like, why did they just take 12 damage? That seems so bad. But because they're kind of going back to this basic of, I need to take this damage once and get rid of this minion right now, rather than let it hit me 2 or 3 or even 4 times and then I'm dead. So they understand my health is a resource that I need to use. Same with cards. Sometimes you need to play in a way where you're potentially drawing more cards. Or maybe you need to play in slower ways where you're, again, only playing like 1 or 2 cards and then you're filling in the rest of your turn with like a hero power or something like that. Maybe you're reserving. Here's a good example. Aggro decks and like OTK style decks generally have a lot of card draw, right? Because they want to get to their certain cards. They want to play a lot of cards in one turn. So they have a lot of card draw. They rely on that card draw resource. They rely on the resource of those cards to get their big plays, to do their things. But let's say in a control matchup, then you see people who will say, like, Wicked Good is very good at this. He'll say, I can't even play this card that draws me 1 card. I cannot play it in this mirror match because if I draw an extra card, I will be ahead in fatigue and I will lose the game, right? So he's almost going the opposite route. I can't draw cards because in that situation, drawing cards actually is very bad. So in that case, it's don't use my cards, don't draw more cards. We're not using cards as a resource necessarily. That's more like the slower pace. We're using cards for maybe multiple value, or we're using hero powers or discovers or something like that for the card resource instead of cards from the deck. So again, these are examples. I'm trying to give as many examples as I can think of kind of how there's different cases for, yes, maybe in that situation, it's, I have to remove this big minion off the board. Or in that mirror match, it's don't draw extra cards. But if you really peel it back, it's kind of like that, like when kids ask, something's happening and then they go, why? And then you try to answer that question, right? And then you answer it and then they go, why? And you answer that question, right? Like it's like peeling back layers, right? Until you really get to the root cause, the root thing, which is these basic skills, these basic understanding of what it is you're actually doing or going for with your plays or your decisions in the games.
I think a good example would be, and I know I'm sure our listeners are tired of hearing me talk about the Paladin that I've been playing for the last couple months, but I was playing and I thought I was playing pretty well. And I had a couple different times I had World 8 or Donkey in the chat while I was playing, and they were saying, I don't like that play. Why didn't you play for Kill the Loss on turn 2? Like, you're holding on to that too often. And in my mentality is that's a card you play when you have a weapon to increase it, especially with the Wind Fury. So you get 2 hits on it. That's 4 extra damage. But you know what? If you don't get to the turn when you have to play your Bane of the Windlord, then that's better because they're dead. So if you play on turn 1, you play a Divine Shield minion. Turn 2, you play for Kill the Loss. You just hit them for 5-7 damage. They still have to clear it. They might have to clear it with their face. And not only that, you have also reduced the cost of your Garden Graces by 2 already. So by sometimes holding on to those resources, you're doing yourself a disservice. And there's other times where, you want to hold on to them because you'll need them later. But just learning to understand when and when not to is huge. And that makes a big difference. Oh, I don't know about you, Dawn. That was a lot of information. um,
Yes, yes. It's basic, but it's a lot at the same time.
so I'm a little full. Like I said, we just talked about a lot, but I think there's always room for a little dessert. But we've already talked to you about dessert. So what I want to know is what's your favorite Thanksgiving Day food?
Such a good question. I feel like it's a tie depending on how good they are. I really like mashed potatoes. But sometimes if they're not very flavorful, they're kind of bland or something, it's like, maybe they're not that great. Sometimes they end up dry. You're like, maybe. But I am a huge fan of like homemade cranberries and like cranberry sauce, where pretty much the way that I make it, it's like a mix between cranberry sauce and cranberries. Like you kind of boil them down so they start popping and it kind of turns into a cranberry sauce, but you still have like some that are almost whole cranberries. That's my favorite.
I cannot do the whole cranberry thing. Give me the gelled cranberry sauce in the can. It's got that can shape when you pull it out. You cut a slice off of it. That's the way to go. But I respect your opinion, even if it might be wrong. Just kidding. What I do need to know though is how were Just a Guy's meatballs?
I thought they were freaking delicious. I loved them. I ate so many. And I was like, these are so good.
Okay, so Ridiculous Hat, the only one that didn't like the meatballs.
Okay. I feel like I got to stand up for Hat a little bit.
Oh, no.
He did. He did like the meatballs. He had already eaten some stuff. We were already waiting on other food because Just a Guy made meatballs, did all this stuff, had snacks, and then ordered a huge meal for everybody as well. So Hat was exhausted because Hat had been running to all these different places. He had just been go, 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 just like Hat is. And then he sat down. I don't know if maybe Just a Guy didn't even know this. I actually offered, after I got some food, I offered Hat. I was like, do you want me to get you some stuff on a plate and come bring it to you? Because Hat did not even want to get up from the chair. He was like, this is the first time I've sat basically since he had gotten off the plane from New York to Anaheim. So I was like, I will get you a plate of food. You can sit here and just chill, and I will bring you a plate, and of course Hat was so humble and no, I'm fine. But I'm like, okay, but I know and I understand how you run around, and Just a Guy being Just a Guy and being very kind, offering meatballs and stuff, but also being a complete smartass, gave Hat a single meatball because Hat was like, yeah, I'll have a little bit. So Just a Guy literally gave him one.
Nice.
So of course Hat just ate a single meatball because that's what Just a Guy gave him.
And Hat didn't actually say he didn't like the meatballs, and even Just a Guy didn't say that. We just we took something out of context and ran with it. It was a lot of fun.
It's like a running joke. Yeah.
Listener, if you have iTunes, pop it open, leave us a review. We'd appreciate it because not many people have iTunes anymore. And that's really the only place I think you can leave reviews. I tried to find one on Spotify. You can leave stars. So if you want to give us 5 stars to help us find people, that'd be wonderful. But if you want to leave us a review that we will read on the show, pop open that iTunes, fill out something quick, and we will read it right here. We've just hit 50 episodes. This is 51. We're not going anywhere. We're still here. So hopefully we will continue to fill your ear holes with great information about becoming better Hearthstone players. I know I know just doing the show and listening to our guests, I have improved greatly over the past year, and I feel I'm a much better Hearthstone player. With still a lot of room to grow, but I don't think I would have been nearly as good as I am without going through this every week and listening to our guests and talking about the game. It has been amazing. Dragonrider, where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at DawnieDK. That's DAWNIEDK. You can find me on both Twitch and YouTube at Dragonrider TCCG, and on the 2 podcasts that I do, generally each week. One of them has been a little bit more sporadic with my health and stuff, but you can find me talking all about Hearthstone and specifically Standard Hearthstone at the Dr. 3 HS podcast. And you can also find me talking with Ron Mexico about kind of more of these like card game concepts, how you can use a lot of these same concepts that we talked about in this episode to get better and learn multiple card games, and kind of how these things differ across card games, and a whole bunch of different card game news and tournament info over at the TCCG Roundtable podcast.
And that is one that I know you stream live. I don't think you always stream Dr. 3 live, do you? Or
yeah, that's correct. We have done some live Dr. 3s, but we typically just do audio for that one. But the TCCG Roundtable is definitely, we do live. And now that, Twitch has actually said, oh yeah, you can do like the multi-streaming. We are back to streaming that both on my Twitch and YouTube simultaneously when we do stream that. So
fantastic. And you can find me on Twitter and Twitch at Tito Santana HS. You got any shout outs this week, Don?
Yeah, I would like to shout out a couple of people here. I'm going to shout out the whole AFG crew, just because, we've been doing a lot of stuff. We're getting ready for next year, and I just absolutely love that team. They are just an incredible group of people who are awesome at the things that they do. And so shout out to them, and, shout out to you and Doc as well, because again, you've decided that I am worth bringing on not once, not twice, but multiple times and repeatedly. But also, I love talking about these kind of like these transcending kind of concepts and these things that you can use and build upon. I really have loved this whole thing that we're doing and talking about these things. And it's inspired a lot of what is going to be coming on my channels and with my content, honestly. So thank you to you guys for that and for doing the show, because, there are a lot of podcasts and a lot of resources for people who are kind of already at that like higher level of play, but there's maybe not as much for people who are trying to learn and trying to get better that's more geared towards them. So shout out to you guys for doing this.
No, we appreciate that. And I'll look forward to my cut of the profits for whatever we inspired. I would like to shout out Sidisi, who gave me a very nice raid yesterday while I was streaming. He's always very generous, and lots like him, Wicked Good, always seem to throw a raid my way. And I like to shout out Doc, who wasn't here today. I hope everything's going okay. And thank you for being my partner for 50 some odd episodes, and looking forward to the next 50. But I think that's it for us. I think we're toast. We'll see you later.
Slide two brothers meet one another when they slide up to the mic. It's bread and butter with one another. Let's start up that recording light.